as Chris stretched out on the couch, relishing the quiet of the empty house. His dad, Paul, was halfway across the world in Bali for a business trip, and his mom, Kylie, was out playing tennis with her friends. At 18, Chris was finally enjoying the freedom of being a college freshman home for the summer. With the house to himself, he decided to indulge in his favorite pastime, self-pleasure. He grabbed his laptop, settled in, and let himself get lost in the moment. Time flew by as Chris immersed himself in the experience, headphones on and the world tuned out. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the front door open or the sound of his mom's tennis bag hitting the floor. Kylie had finished her game early, the match ending quicker than expected. She called out, "Chris, I'm home," but got no response. Curious, she walked toward the living room. What she saw made her freeze. Chris, oblivious to her presence, was completely engrossed in his activity. Kylie's face flushed with shock and embarrassment. "Chris," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and discomfort. Chris nearly jumped out of his skin, scrambling to close his laptop and cover himself. "Mom, I didn't know you'd be back so early," he stammered, his face burning with humiliation. Kylie quickly turned away, running a hand through her hair. "I'll just give you a minute," she muttered, retreating to the kitchen. Chris sat there, mortified, his heart racing. How could he face her after this? The awkward silence that followed was deafening. When he finally mustered the courage to approach her, Kylie was sipping tea, her expression unreadable. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he began, but she held up a hand. "Let's just not talk about it," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Chris nodded, grateful for the reprieve but knowing things would never quite be the same. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the faint clinking of Kylie's spoon as she stirred her tea. Chris lingered in the doorway of the kitchen, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face still burning with shame. He knew he couldn't avoid the conversation forever. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Mom, I'm really sorry," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for you to. I didn't think you'd be back so early." Kylie set her cup down and turned to face him, her expression a mix of discomfort and understanding. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Chris, I'm not going to pretend this isn't awkward, because it is. But I also know you're 18, and this kind of thing is normal for someone your age." Chris blinked, surprised by her calm tone. He had expected anger, maybe even a lecture, but not this. I feel terrible," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. Kylie nodded, her gaze softening. "I get that, and I'm not going to shame you for it. But we do need to set some boundaries. This is still our home, and there are times and places for privacy." Chris nodded quickly, relief washing over him. "Of course. I'll be more careful, I promise." Kylie gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Good. And Chris, it's okay. Really, we'll move past this." The tension between them didn't disappear entirely, but Kylie's calm demeanor began to ease Chris's embarrassment. As he retreated to his room, he felt a strange mix of gratitude and lingering awkwardness. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. Over the next few days, the air between Kylie and Chris began to shift. The initial awkwardness lingered, but Kylie's calm and open approach slowly chipped away at Chris's embarrassment. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Kylie broke the silence with a casual question. "So, Chris, how often do you watch that kind of stuff?" Chris froze, his fork hovering midair over his plate of spaghetti. He hadn't expected her to bring it up so directly. I don't know," he mumbled, his face flushing. "Not that often, I guess." Kylie nodded, her tone light but thoughtful. "It's normal, I just want to make sure you're being safe and not letting it take over your life or anything." Chris stared at her, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, I get that," he said finally, his voice barely audible. A few days later, Kylie surprised him again. Chris, she began, her tone casual but firm, I was thinking, maybe we could watch something together. You know, to normalize it. I don't want you to feel like it's some big secret or something to be ashamed of. Chris nearly choked on his water. Wait, what? You mean, like, together? Kylie shrugged, her expression calm but serious. Yeah, I mean, it's part of life. If we can talk about it openly, maybe it won't feel so weird. Chris was stunned. The idea was both shocking and intriguing. He couldn't decide if it was the most awkward or progressive thing he'd ever heard. I don't know, he stammered. Kylie smiled gently. Think about it. No pressure. As the days passed, Chris found himself reflecting on her offer. It was unconventional, sure, but it also made him feel seen and understood in a way he hadn't expected. The tension between them was still there, but it was slowly being replaced by something new, a strange, tentative openness that was also quite arousing. Chris had pre-cum any time he would think about it. Chris sat in his room, his heart pounding as he hovered over the play button on his laptop. He had been thinking about Kylie's offer for days, and now, curiosity got the better of him. He turned up the volume just enough for the sounds to carry through the thin walls of their house. He waited, half expecting her to knock on his door in annoyance. Instead, after a few moments, there was a soft tap. Chris froze, his face burning. Come in, he said hesitantly. Kylie opened the door, her expression calm but curious. Mind if I join you? She asked, her tone casual, as if she were asking to share a snack. Chris blinked, stunned. Sure, he managed to say, scooting over to make room on the bed. Kylie sat down, her demeanor relaxed. I just want you to know it's okay, she said. You don't have to hide this stuff from me. Chris couldn't believe what was happening. As they watched together, Kylie offered light commentary, not in a judgmental way, but as if they were discussing a movie. The tension in the room slowly melted away. A few days later, Kylie handed him a small, discreetly wrapped box. I got you something, she said with a smile. Chris opened it to find a fleshlight inside. His jaw dropped. Kylie, what? I thought it might help, she said simply. You shouldn't feel ashamed about exploring this stuff. I'm here to support you. Chris was speechless. Over the following weeks, Kylie became more involved, offering advice and encouragement. Their dynamic evolved into something neither of them could have predicted, a strange but genuine partnership built on openness and trust. It was unconventional, but for the first time, Chris felt truly understood. Chris had always been a private person, especially when it came to his sexuality. Growing up, he'd been taught to feel shame about his desires, to keep them hidden and locked away. But when Kylie entered his life, everything changed. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, open, unapologetic, and fiercely supportive. Over time, she began to take a more active role in guiding him, offering pointers on how to enjoy his private moments without guilt or hesitation. At first, Chris was embarrassed by her involvement, but as the weeks went by, he began to see her actions for what they truly were. A form of unconditional love and support. Kylie's openness stemmed from her own experiences. She had once struggled with shame and repression, and she didn't want Chris to go through the same thing. Sexuality is a natural part of who we are, she told him one evening, her voice calm and reassuring. There's no reason to hide it or feel ashamed. I just want to help you navigate it in a healthy way. Chris appreciated her words, but he still found it difficult to fully let go of his inhibitions. That all changed one unforgettable evening. It started like any other night. Chris was in his room, the lights dimmed, the adult movie playing on the big screen. He was using the fleshlight Kylie had gifted him, trying to relax and enjoy the moment. Just as he was getting into it, there was a soft knock at the door. Before he could respond, Kylie walked in, wearing nothing but a silky dressing gown. She didn't say a word, simply sat down in a chair at a 90-degree angle from him, her presence both calming and electrifying. Chris froze, unsure of what to do. But Kylie's demeanor was so casual, so unbothered, that he found himself continuing, his eyes flicking between the screen and her. As the movie played, he noticed Kylie's shift in her chair. She lay back, one foot propped up, her dressing gown slipping open slightly. Chris's breath hitched when he realized she wasn't wearing anything underneath. The sight of her bare skin sent a jolt of arousal through him, and he felt himself growing even more excited. Kylie seemed to sense his reaction, her lips curling into a faint smile. She let her gown fall open completely, revealing her body in all its glory. Chris couldn't look away. She began to touch herself, her fingers moving slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. Her eyes closed, her head tilted back, and soft moans escaped her lips. Chris was mesmerized. The combination of the movie, the fleshlight, and Kylie's uninhibited display was overwhelming. He felt a surge of pleasure building within him, stronger than anything he'd ever experienced. With a roar, he came, his body convulsing as he let out 4 loud, guttural grunts of release. It was the most intense climax of his life. Kylie, clearly aroused by his reaction, opened her eyes and looked at him. "Hand it over," she said, her voice husky. Chris blinked, confused. "But, it's full," he stammered. "I know," she replied, her tone firm but playful. "Hand it to me." Reluctantly, Chris passed her the fleshlight. Kylie took it without hesitation, tipping it over her chest. Chris watched in stunned silence as the contents spilled onto her skin, running down her body and pooling between her legs. She let out a soft sigh, her fingers immediately finding their way to her most sensitive spot. Chris's jaw dropped as he watched her. She moved with a confidence and intensity that left him breathless. Her moans grew louder, more urgent, until she let out a guttural groan that seemed to shake the room. Her body arched, and then it happened, a powerful, almost explosive climax that left her trembling and gasping for air. Chris had never seen anything like it. It was as if a sprinkler had gone off, the sheer force of her release leaving both of them in awe, a full-on squirting release. But the most astonishing part was yet to come. As Chris sat there, still processing what he'd just witnessed, he felt another wave of pleasure surge through him. Without even touching himself, he came again, his body responding purely to the intensity of the moment. Kylie, still catching her breath, looked over at him and smiled. "See," she said softly. "This is what happens when you let go of the shame. When you allow yourself to truly feel." Chris nodded, his mind racing. "Fuck Mom, that was the hottest thing I've ever seen in my life," Chris said. He knew one thing for certain. Kylie had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. And as they sat there together, basking in the afterglow of their shared experience, Chris felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the pleasure, but for the unconditional love and support that had brought them to this moment. As their unique arrangement continued, Kylie knew it was important to establish clear boundaries to maintain a healthy dynamic. One evening, after a particularly open conversation, she turned to Chris and said, "This is just between us, okay? Your father doesn't need to know about this. It's our private understanding." Chris nodded, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. He appreciated her support but also understood the need for discretion. Over time, they settled into a new routine. Kylie would occasionally join Chris in his room, sitting quietly as they watched videos together. She offered advice, not just about technique but about embracing his sexuality without shame. Her presence was calming, and Chris found himself opening up in ways he never thought possible. He began to see her not just as his mother, but as a confidant who genuinely cared about his well-being. One night, as they sat together, Kylie said, "It's important to know your limits and respect them. That's how you build a healthy relationship with yourself and others." Chris listened intently, absorbing her words. He realized that her guidance wasn't just about physical pleasure, it was about self-acceptance and emotional growth. Their bond deepened, but Kylie always made sure to reinforce the boundaries they'd set. "This is about helping you," she reminded him. "It's not something we share with anyone else." Chris agreed, feeling a profound sense of trust and appreciation for her. As the weeks passed, their routine became a source of comfort for both of them. Kylie's support gave Chris the confidence to explore his desires without fear, while Chris's openness allowed Kylie to feel she was making a positive impact. Together, they navigated this uncharted territory with care and respect, ensuring their relationship remained strong and healthy. As the golden hues of summer began to fade, Kylie and Chris found themselves preparing for the inevitable return of Chris's father. The season had been transformative for both of them, marked by a unique bond that had deepened in ways neither could have anticipated. But with the end of summer came the end of their special arrangement, and they both knew it was time to return to their usual roles. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Kylie turned to Chris with a gentle smile. "This doesn't change anything between us," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "Our bond is still strong, and I'm so proud of how much you've grown this summer. You've matured in ways that matter, and I hope you'll carry that with you." Chris nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. He was grateful for her support but also saddened by the thought of losing the closeness they'd shared. "I'll miss this," he admitted quietly. "But I understand why it has to end." Kylie reached out and squeezed his hand. "It's not an ending, Chris. It's just a new chapter. And I want you to promise me something. Keep being open about your feelings. Don't shut yourself off. That's how you'll continue to grow." Chris smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at her words. "I promise," he said. As the days dwindled, they decided to mark the end of their arrangement with a light-hearted competition. "Let's see who can come first," Kylie suggested with a playful grin. Chris laughed, agreeing to the challenge. The competition was intense, filled with laughter and teasing, but in the end, Kylie won by just a few seconds. "Guess I still have a few tricks up my sleeve," she joked, and Chris couldn't help but laugh. That night, as Chris lay in bed, he reflected on the lessons he'd learned over the summer. He thought about the trust, openness, and mutual respect that had defined his relationship with Kylie. It was a bond unlike any other, one that had shaped him in ways he would carry for the rest of his life. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unique connection they shared. When Chris's father returned, the house quickly settled back into its familiar rhythm. The quiet dinners, the predictable routines, the easy banter between his parents, it all felt normal again. Yet, for Chris, something was different. The summer had left an indelible mark on him, a quiet confidence and self-awareness that hadn't been there before. He carried it with him like a secret, a gift from his mother that no one else could see. Kylie, too, slipped back into her usual role, her unorthodox approach to parenting tucked away like a cherished memory. They never spoke of their arrangement again, but Chris often caught her glancing at him with a knowing smile, as if to remind him of the bond they'd forged. He felt a deep gratitude for her, for the way she'd pushed him to grow, to confront his fears, and to embrace his emotions. It wasn't something he could put into words, but it was there, woven into the fabric of who he was becoming. As the days turned into weeks, Chris found himself reflecting on that summer. In many ways, it had changed everything. He was more self-assured, more willing to take risks, more open about his feelings. Yet, in other ways, it had changed nothing at all. Life at home was the same, his parents were the same, and the world around him carried on as it always had. But Chris knew he was different, and that made all the difference. The summer had been a quiet revolution, one that no one else could see but him. And for that, he was forever grateful. One evening, as Chris, Kylie, and his father were about to sit down for dinner, the power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. Chris grabbed a torch, and the three of them made their way to the meter box to investigate. As they huddled together, Kylie turned to Chris and, without thinking, said, "Hand it over, the fleshlight." There was a brief, stunned silence before Chris's father broke into a chuckle. "You mean the flashlight," he corrected, his voice tinged with amusement. Chris and Kylie froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances, before bursting into uncontrollable laughter. The absurdity of the moment dissolved any tension, and soon all three were laughing so hard they could barely stand. In the dim glow of the torchlight, The mishap became a memory they'd never forget, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, laughter could light the way. What an amazing story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you wish you had a parent who was so open and understanding where you can just let yourself go?